America saw a sharp spike in violent crimes in 2020, a trend that doesn't appear to be letting up. So what's causing the sudden surge in violence? I'll explain the root causes in tonight's Hold the Line. Welcome to Hold the Line. I'm Buck Sexton. There is a plague in this country right now. Not just, of course, COVID-19. Another one. Violence in cities and towns all across the country. It has been spiking. There is a surge. The data does not lie, and it is quite clear. Here we have homicide statistics from across the United States. And as you can see, Seattle, 74%, New Orleans, 62%, Atlanta, 60%, Chicago, 56%, Boston, 50%. Just go down those numbers. I mean, 74% increase in murders? I just wonder, Seattle had that whole moment in time where they had the autonomous zone set up, where left-wing Biden voters decided the police wouldn't even be allowed in a few square block area of downtown Seattle. What was that all about? Right. When you kick cops out, when you undermine law enforcement, when you get rid of police, bad things happen. New York City, which is a place that is usually pointed to as a miracle when it comes to crime reduction, has now taken a huge step in the wrong direction over the last year. We see here New York shootings in 2019, 62, 2020, 56, 2021, 149 for the month of April. Massive increase. Now that's month to month, or that's, comparing different months in different years, or the same month in different years. But let's all be very clear that however you look at the data across the country, murders are way up, rapes are way up, assaults, burglaries, home invasions, car thefts, all this is going on, and you'd have to ask, why? Now, the media would have you believe that it's because of the COVID pandemic, but that doesn't really make any sense. With the COVID pandemic, you have far fewer people interacting with each other in public places like restaurants and bars and nightclubs, far fewer people out in the streets to engage in the drug trade or other illicit activity. So it should be easier for law enforcement to keep our streets safe. But what we see day in and day out, surveillance footage of brazen, broad daylight robberies and beatings, hate crimes surging. There must be a reason for this. It's not the pandemic. That's just the excuse. Well, if you really look at the data, what you find out is that this surge in violent crime in particular started right around May, June of 2020. Why would that happen? You'll recall that that is after George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, and there were anti-cop riots all across the country. There was the BLM movement, there was the Democrat Party demanding more accountability for cops, defunding of law enforcement in many places. And they actually did cut police budgets. Well, that had the entirely predictable results that we're seeing now play out all across the country. Did anybody really think that our streets would get safer with fewer law enforcement personnel? Did any Democrat really believe that by cutting back on the resources intended for public safety to protect people from violent crime, to find and punish those who commit violent crimes, that would make major cities safer, better places to be? Then why do it? This is unfortunately a return to the thinking of the 60s and 70s from the progressive left, that crime is not something that has to be stamped out and dealt with sternly, but crime is just a social dysfunction that we all share guilt in. That criminals who do incredibly heinous and violent things should always be given a greater degree of leeway than people like you and me want to give them, because it's really a social and societal problem. It's all of us, you see. It takes a village, so to speak. So they don't want people to be locked up for long periods of time. They don't want aggressive law enforcement against violent crime. They just assume that if we make the cops the problem, then somehow things will get better. Here is a chart of fatal police shootings through in 2021. You've had total black individuals shot by cops fatally, 52. 3 of them were unarmed. 109 white individuals shot by cops, 5 of them were unarmed. We could eliminate all fatal police shootings altogether in this country and it wouldn't even put a dent in homicides and violent crime overall. It's a rounding error by the numbers to what we're actually seeing, which is the largest year-over-year increase in murders in America since the 1960s, since we actually were keeping this data. Clearly, this is an enormous problem, a huge policy challenge, and the Biden administration is just head in the sand over all of it. Don't want to deal with it. Still focus on the police as the source of the problem instead of the police as an essential component of the answer. Here's just a series of headlines you see. Police in Philly and beyond are struggling with a shortage of police recruits. Massachusetts Police Department see pretty depressing decline in potential new recruits. New Jersey seeking state police recruits, applications historically low. This is what happens when, for reasons of political pandering, Democrats undermine police, pull legal protections and resources from law enforcement, put the DOJ in this overwatch position to find racism in every department anywhere all across the country, and people don't want to deal with it as a career anymore. You have cops who are resigning from their jobs early, who are taking early retirement, and you have a lot of people, as we just showed you, in departments all across the U.S. who are not even signing up. They don't want to be dealing with this because they don't have the political backing necessary to do the job and keep the public safe. Not without always looking over their shoulder for the possibility of a video of them wrestling a suspect to the ground that can be taken out of context even and used as the basis for a personal lawsuit perhaps if they get rid of qualified immunity. And we have district attorneys across the country who increasingly side with violent perpetrators against law enforcement, try to give them more and more lenient sentences as if somehow that's going to make this better. We are dealing with not only a mass hysteria around lockdowns, but a mass delusion around criminality in the United States. This belief that cops are the problem, that law enforcement are the reason or the primary front in our battle against criminal violence is insane. Meaning that cops are the cause of this? Cops are protecting us from this. And yet, what does the BLM movement focus on? In general, what's going on in cities, or the handful of unarmed police-involved shootings that have happened this year so far? As we all know, this is about politics, not about reality. Some people are actually taking the right pathway here. I have to give credit where it's due. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida is saying, we're not defunding, we are funding further the police. Here's what he said.
Obviously, we were very concerned with public safety during this session. We passed the strongest anti-rioting legislation in the country that really says a couple things. One is we're not going to let local governments defund law enforcement. Now, granted, in Southwest Florida, that's probably not as much of a concern, but that's something that could happen in some of these other enclaves in the state of Florida. By passing this bill and me signing it, that is not going to happen. If a local jurisdiction tries to do that, we're restoring the funding.
Going to back up the cops. Florida making the right moves. A lot of other places, all the wrong decisions. We'll be right back with more Hold the Line. Stay with us. I've been telling you for a while now about online thieves who can easily steal your home's title. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take it from this thief who stole over 150 homes and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. This is why you need Home Title Lock.
Nobody thinks that I can take their house and borrow against the house. Oh, no, I have title insurance for that. No, it's in my name, or he would have to get some special document. They would call me. You know, nobody's calling you. After I've stolen the title, borrowed against it, or sold the property, or done whatever I've done with it, it's 60 to 90 days to even figure out that they're the victim of this crime. You know, by that point, you start getting foreclosure notices, and you realize you've got 4 mortgages on your house. Not only that, you don't even own your home anymore. It's not even in your name.
Heard enough? Don't let this crime happen to you. Go to HomeTitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim, and enter code RADIO for 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HomeTitleLock.com. The United Federation of Teachers has been working overtime to keep America's schools shuttered. Not only have they publicly opposed reopening, but now we've learned that they've been manipulating the CDC guidance behind the scenes. A recent report by the New York Post reads, the American Federation of Teachers lobbied the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention on and even suggested language for the federal agency's school reopening guidance released in February. The powerful teachers union's full court press preceded the federal agency putting the brakes on a full reopening of in-person classrooms, according to emails between top CDC, AFT, and White House officials. The report continues. The lobbying paid off. In at least 2 instances, language suggestions offered by the union were adopted nearly verbatim into the final text of the CDC document. Follow the science, they said. Did they do that? Well, to teach you a lesson, of course, they pretended to. They are teachers, after all. In a recent tweet, Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, wrote, I think many people who saw teachers as glorified babysitters got a reality check this year when schooling had to be done at home. Teachers deserve respect and recognition for all the ways they help communities. So not only do they want to keep your kids' schools shut down, they want you to thank them for it. Joining us now is Jonathan Butcher. He's the Will Skillman Fellow in Education at the Heritage Foundation. Jonathan, good to have you.
Great to be with you.
Any surprise, anything you want to add to this notion that the CDC was in a PR back and forth for the proper way to describe why the schools should not be open, which, in my opinion, they should have been all along?
Well, I think it's important to note that about 1/3 of schools around the U.S. are still not back to full in-person instruction. And this includes large cities. Districts like Los Angeles are still going to part-time, as well as in Seattle, where even if students are there for in-person learning, it's part-time for the day, right? It's not a full day worth of school. So we need to understand that this is now another full school year, plus half of the last school year or a part of the last semester, where students have not been back for in-person instruction.
What do we know about the demands of teachers' unions for the areas that are not in-person instruction fully yet? Are there still rumblings, at least, that the expectation will be children have to be vaccinated as well as educators? Because that was talked about and then they quieted down, but we have a whole other school year starting in September.
Well, I think it's important to remember that what happened after the spring last year, when teacher unions realized that schools would not be opening to in-person instruction right away in the fall in many of these large cities, was that they started to advocate for ideas and policy goals that had nothing to do with schools. Things like forgiving rents and mortgages and getting police out of schools, if not out of communities entirely. So unions have capitalized on this opportunity to be in the spotlight to advocate for their other policy goals.
What is it that the unions really want here? Why is it just that they want their members to have the option to Zoom in from the couch for all eternity, or what?
Well, I think it's clear from what has been so far a pretty cozy relationship with the Biden administration that the unions are excited to see taxpayers spend a considerable amount, perhaps even an untold amount of new spending on public schools. This could possibly mean the hiring of additional employees, which would then mean more union members in the future. I mean, the amount of money that Biden is talking about in his recent proposals from infrastructure and beyond this is money that has not been considered for public schools perhaps ever. And given the research we have on the relationship between student achievement and spending, we know that this will increase their bureaucracy that's in schools and not go to what student needs in the classroom.
Can you give us a sense of what kind of political sway does the teachers union really represent for the Democrats, just in terms of donations, of membership? I mean, I think if people had a better and more readily available understanding of the political muscle behind teachers unions, which are entirely behind the Democrat Party, this is not a bipartisan thing, they might feel very differently about the way some of these negotiations go on. Can you give us a sense of it?
Well, all you have to do is look at what has happened in some of the metro areas in the past 6 months that have been trying to figure out how to get kids back in class. So take Chicago, right? The union successfully told their members not to come back, even after the district and the mayor said that teachers should be back for in-person instruction. Union said no. There was a standoff, and reopening was delayed. And the reopening, especially for high school students, was delayed even longer than it was for elementary and middle school. All of this replayed itself in Philadelphia just a few weeks later. So even when district officials and local leaders are saying to teachers, we are ready to open for in-person instruction, if the union says no, the districts so far have backed down, right? And they've given in. So that means that the needs of the unions are being put ahead of the needs of students and teachers.
We have here the Biden Education Secretary Miguel Cardona defending the teachers' union's slowness to want to return to in-person instruction. Here's what he said.
So if we can't blame President Biden for the fact that many schools are still closed, do we blame teachers' unions?
No, I think that another quick out. Reopening schools in the middle of a pandemic is not as easy as some may think. You know, I remember serving as Commissioner of Education in Connecticut when we were making decisions. And, you know, there's some schools that are very over 100, 120 years old, where old ventilation systems. And we have to make sure that those schools are operational and that they're safe and that there's good communication around those strategies that are needed in order to safely reopen schools.
I mean, it just honestly just sounds like a bunch of blather, and the whole point is, oh, well, no one's really to blame for this, even though the science, so to speak, has indicated it's perfectly safe to reopen schools. There are places in the country that have had in-school or in-person teaching in schools for the entire school year in 2020, 2021. Private and parochial schools in particular have been doing that. They have not been scenes of death and despair from COVID, quite the contrary. So are people, Jonathan, meaning parents, finally seeing this for what it is? Is there a backlash against the teachers' unions?
Well, look, to start with, you're right. Some 60% of private schools around the country have been open to in-person instruction for this school year. And look, if we're talking about April, even March, we're not talking about the middle of the pandemic, right? I mean, we have vaccines, which we hope are bringing for most of the country closer to the end of a pandemic rather than saying we're at the beginning or the middle. Remember, last year, the Trump administration also delivered money in significant sums to the tune of $13 billion last March, another 50 plus billion in December. So the money has been there for schools to use for months now, and just a small fraction of it has been spent. To your latter point, are parents realizing what's going on? I think they are, and state lawmakers are too. I mean, look at what's happened in West Virginia, Kentucky, which were union strongholds for many years, have passed private school choice options for families just this year. You even have lawmakers in places like Rhode Island talking about lifting a ban on charter school growth in that state. And that's just a sample of what's happening with public and private school choice around the country. That's the story coming out of the pandemic, is that families have realized that districts have let them down, and now parents can take these matters and should be into their own hands, and state lawmakers should be giving them the opportunity to make decisions and choices over how and where their children learn.
Jonathan, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're living in very uncertain times, and being prepared for the unknown is more important than ever. I'm sure you've noticed the world we live in today is anything but predictable. The government is passing massive spending bills. The Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars in fiat currency, and many experts are predicting inflation could run rampant in the coming months. That could spell disaster for the dollars in your bank account. We could all benefit from something a little more reliable right about now. Well, what could be more reliable than real gold and silver? I'm talking about real gold and silver you can actually hold right in your hands. Call the Oxford Gold Group right now and learn how easy it is to get real gold and silver sent securely directly to your home, or how you can have real gold and silver placed in your IRA or 401k. Just call the Oxford Gold Group at 833-600-GOLD and ask for your free guide on owning gold and silver. Again, call the Oxford Gold Group right now at 833-600-GOLD. The Oxford Gold Group is the only gold company I trust. Call them right now, 833-600-GOLD, 833-600-GOLD. Turns out Governor Cuomo's nursing home cover-up was bigger than we'd thought. The New York Times reported that on top of blocking health officials from telling the truth, his senior staffers also quashed a scientific paper that reported the true fatality total in New York. Is the embattled governor's run going to be coming to an end? We'll see. Here to discuss, Mark Simone, host from 10 a.m. to noon on 710 WOR in NYC. Mark, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So we have Cuomo was securing a seven-figure book deal, and he was suppressing. We already know he was lying, right? But the latest is that he was lying even worse than we thought he was for a longer time. Is that pretty much what's going on?
Yeah, even for him, it was a lot of lying. It was a major book deal. A guy like that, first-time author, governor, doesn't get $4 or $5 million for a book. He got that, which, by the way, is a way to pass money to a sitting governor when you're doing business in New York State and you're the publisher. And he wanted to make sure the book deal went through, so he was covering up like crazy that 15,000 people were dead in the nursing homes. By fudging all the numbers, saying it was a hospital death, not a nursing home death, he somehow got it down to 5,000 or 6,000. He's now blaming the whole thing on Donald Trump. In today's news conference, he said it was a Trump investigation, the Trump Justice Department, Trump was after him. Of course, that's not the case. It was the thousands of families who were just shattered by this, who started this clamor for this investigation.
I know Democrats in New York, your home state and mine, are willing to believe a lot, especially as they walk around in Central Park with 2 masks on outside still and everything else. Like we know that there's a lot that they will abide by because their side tells them to. But I mean, blaming Trump isn't the AG, Letitia James of New York State, looking into this? I mean, aren't these now just facts when we're talking about the suppression of the truth? I mean, are Cuomo's lies just becoming pathetic in that they don't work, or is he still managing, are his numbers still looking pretty good among Democrats?
No, his numbers are bad, and he will be caught in the federal investigation, U.S. Attorney's Office, Letitia James. They'll prove he covered it up. They'll prove he obstructed. There's no question about it. He's doing a George Costanza. Remember the Seinfeld episode where George had to teach the secret of lying, and he said, if you believe it, it's not a lie. So Cuomo, in some psychotic kind of way, has convinced himself that everything he's saying is true, and he says it with such ferocity and passion that it looks believable, even though there's no chance on earth he's telling the truth in this.
It's pretty amazing. There's some Machiavellian stuff he does. I know recently he called for a press conference, where was it, out in Buffalo or something, but yeah. Nobody had any notice of this. So instead of having the Albany press corps, who are all Democrats, but at least they do this for a job, you had like the local, Buffalo Times Tribune political reporter showing up who just gets manhandled by him. So, I mean, his ruthlessness, he does act a bit like an amoral Italian, prince in the 16th century. We have to give him credit for that, at least.
Well, they always used to call him Emperor Cuomo, King Cuomo. He just dictates all this stuff. Today's briefing, he put up this thing. He said the 3 things you judge New York by. This is what New York has to have: be clean, be safe, and economically competitive. So if those are the 3 metrics, he's the worst governor in history, the biggest crime spike ever. It's filthy, and the worst taxes ever. And everybody's leaving. So by his own definition, he stinks.
He also, there's a whole other layer here. It's one thing to hide your numbers as a public official because of politics and you don't want the heat, which is bad enough. But with the $4 million book deal, now it's almost like it is like you're hiding it as well because you want a big payoff. So you don't want the public to know what you're really doing. Whole thing's a mess. Got to ask you, do you think that, is there any turning of opinion in Albany among Democrats in the state legislature for any kind of action, though? It feels like you have, national level Democrats, Schumer and others have said a few nasty things about him. The only guy who really seems to go after him, though, is de Blasio.
Well, a lot of people think he's okay now. He got through it because it got quiet. It got quiet. This is the lull between 2 storms. It may be quiet on the front pages in the news, but behind the scenes, there are 30 people testifying at the Attorney General's office. The Eastern District U.S. Attorney's Office is working hard. They're compiling a massive investigation. The Attorney General's report will be devastating, not only on the lying about the nursing home, but the sexual harassment stuff. The legislature, they're using him right now because he's in a hostage situation. He has to do whatever they tell him. A week or two ago, they took away his emergency powers, overruled him on things. He sat there quietly. But no, it's the lull between the two storms. The next one will be huge and probably take him out.
Now, we have rising crime, and this is a nationwide story that New York is a part of, in the sense that we can see the numbers in New York for the last 12 months for homicides, very similar to what you have in pretty much every other major city in the country. I think actually in every major city in the country. Chicago, Los Angeles, I mean, you name it. You have huge spikes, 30, 40% in homicides and shootings. And you mark it, it seems like at the national level there's no discussion of this, and the New York media seems to not talk about it very much. I mean, we have the worst murder rate in over 20 years in America, nationwide and in our biggest city, and I barely ever see stories about it. What's going on?
And this is different. Chicago always had a crime problem. It just got a little worse. Minneapolis, all these cities always had crime problems, and it got worse. New York was totally safe. It was the safest big city in America. We had Bill Bratton, we had Ray Kelly. It was perfect. So to take this and get this out of control is a real tragedy. We've had the biggest crime spike in history. We had dozens and dozens of shootings in the last couple weeks. We've never had this. It's been years, decades since we've done this. So, I mean, if you were bin Laden and you were looking to destroy New York, all you had to do is find Cuomo and de Blasio and send them.
I got a theory I want to pose to you, and that is that I think that one of the reasons the media doesn't cover it, obviously Biden, Democrat, they're covering from in that regard, but one of the reasons why you don't hear more about this is they're also trying to figure out a narrative where it's not in any way tied to the BLM riots and everything we saw last summer. Because if anyone looks at a chart, they'll see that right around May, June of 2020 was when things really took off. I mean, you have a lot of cities where you had a 50, 60, 70% increase in murders starting right around then. And it keeps going. Philadelphia, Mark, our neighbor down to the south, they're on track already this year to have the most murders in the history of the city. And I think that one of the reasons they won't touch this is because they can't even think of the BS left-wing reason why it's happening. So what are they going to say?
Well, yeah. The other thing is those riots. First of all, you had defund the police, hold back the police, restrict the police, and that let it get a little. When
all
those
tied
riots
together.
Yeah, but when those riots happened, and Cuomo and other guard didn't send in the National Guard, that's when it all fell apart. That's when they knew these politicians were too scared to send the police in, send the National Guard in, no matter what they did. That's when all hell broke loose. These terrible Asian attacks in New York, whatever that underlying problem was, it all of a sudden boiled over because they realized nothing would get these cops out. Nothing would send the National Guard out. Every criminal, every bad guy of every kind was emboldened by those riots last summer.
Gavin Newsom, he might go, but it's going to be a Democrat who ends up winning in California, the governor's race. Any real chance we might have a Republican starting in 2022 in the governor's chair?
Yeah, anything can happen. And Rudy Giuliani lost when he ran in '89, and he was on track to lose again in '93. But it was just like this, very dangerous. Crime was out of control, and it was something the polls couldn't measure. People of all neighborhoods, every economic group, every ethnic group, they were scared. They wanted protection. They wanted the police back. So this may be going on under the radar, and no poll is picking this up. So this could change everything, not to mention taxes and all of that. Even most Democrats quietly may just pull the other lever this time.
Radio host Mark Simone of 710 WOR. Mark, good to see you, man. Thanks for the expertise.
Thanks.
The reason I'm bothering to do this is I keep hearing on the press, Biden's going to raise your taxes. Anybody making less than $400,000 a year will not pay a single penny in taxes. And we will not increase the deficit either, unlike the last gigantic tax cut, which increased the deficit by $2 trillion.
President Joe Biden repeating his pledge to not raise taxes on those making less than $400,000 per year. With close to $6 trillion in spending plan between several initiatives, I'm a little skeptical of that claim. How does he actually plan on paying for all of this? Well, I mean, higher taxes, that's definitely true. Among other things, Biden is proposing raising the capital gains tax on those earning over $1 million a year by nearly double. He'll raise the top tax rate to just under 40%, and he'll allocate additional resources to the IRS. Ouch! Yeah, that's right. To enhance tax audits. of households with more than $400,000 of income. On its face, none of that would appear to affect anyone making less than $400,000, as Biden has promised. But will the pain be limited to the top 1% as advertised? Our next guest doesn't think so. Congressman Kevin Brady of Texas joins us to make sense of this all right now. Congressman, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Oh, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
So he's saying no one making less than $400,000 is going to be touched by any of this. Oh, Biden, the populist. What's the truth of this?
Yeah, the truth is a lot of families making less than $400,000 are going to pay a pretty steep price for these tax increases. So at the joint address, I counted 6.5 million U.S. jobs that will be lost because of President Biden's tax increases. Look, there's no question he inherited a strong economic recovery and inherited life-saving vaccines. But these are crippling tax increases, I think, will sabotage our jobs recovery. And ultimately, it's going to land on working families and on communities when they see their companies and jobs moving overseas.
Congressman, one important part of our focus here right after the speech was looking at, well, what can Biden, the Biden White House, and the Democrats definitely do with the numbers they have, right? Putting aside things like the elimination of the filibuster and the all-out steamrolling of the Republican side in Congress, the tax changes, for example, if Biden wants to do this, is there really anything to stop him from doing this? And of course, with the Democrat Party going along.
Yeah, great question. So the infrastructure spending, very little of which is on infrastructure, can't go to that reconciliation process where you basically avoid the filibuster in the Senate. But the tax provisions can. But I will tell you, I don't think this is a done deal by any measure. I know the White House is telling everyone it is, but there is only a 3-vote margin in the House among Democrats. Very tight margin in the Senate. Tell you, more and more of who call themselves moderate Democrats are starting to understand there are real job losses in their communities as a result of these tax increases. And the truth of the matter is, we don't need these increases to pay for real infrastructure. So this is going to be a big battle, really, over the economic future of the country. And at the end of the day, by the way, if you count all infrastructure and the economic impact from that over the long term, these tax increases negate all of that and more. So, in effect, while the president talked jobs, America's a net loser in this.
Congressman, is there enough based on, the actual math that would be at play, is there enough to pay for all the trillions of dollars of spending that Biden has said he wants the government to, putting aside, as you point out, whether they can actually get through the infrastructure spending with their current slim majorities? Is there enough in the tax raises to pay for the spending that they would want to get through?
The short answer is no. Look, even these business tax rates are 5 times larger than the corporate tax cuts that we created. In this proposal, there's a huge budget gimmick. He says it won't raise the deficit a dime, but he only has 8 years of spending, but 15 years of tax increases. In Washington, we all know what that means. When the spending finishes in 8 years, they will re-up it. So, of course, this is going to add to the deficit. And the truth of the matter is, I don't think the country's ever seen $6 trillion of new government spending announced over just a few weeks. It is, at the end of the day, it's going to have a big impact.
I also want to ask you, Congressman, while we got you here, there's been some back and forth between members of the GOP, some friendly fire, if you will, involving Liz Cheney. And here is Nancy Pelosi speaking on this issue.
I do commend Lynn Cheney for her courage, for her patriotism, and I wish her well. Perhaps this challenge will make her stronger. I don't know. That's up to their caucus. I don't welcome their participation in our caucus, and I'm sure they don't welcome my participation in theirs.
Just a quick note for everybody. Nancy Pelosi is vaccinated. She's outside. She's by herself. She's wearing a mask. I'm not letting that go, folks. I just want everyone to pay attention to how Looney Tunes these Democrats really are. But Congressman, I mean, what's going on? When you got the Speaker of the House, who's a Democrat, not just any Democrat, but Nancy Pelosi, giving a pat on the back to Liz Cheney on the Republican side, people are asking questions. What the heck is going on here? We want a united Republican Party. What has to happen?
Yeah, so I think we are one. You know, considering the Speaker had to import COVID positive members of her conference into the House chamber to cobble together a majority, and that she spends her time removing Republicans from committees while keeping Democrats who are anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists and others who are having affairs with Chinese spies. She's not really the most credible on these issues, honestly. Here's what I think the issue is. One, Liz Cheney's a fierce conservative on lower taxes, strong defense, pro-life issues. People admire her for that. While our House Republicans disagree strongly with the vote on impeachment, we also understand this was a vote of conscience for her and 10 others. Here's the challenge right now. We are unified on stopping the socialist agenda, including these tax increases. Our messaging, though, keeps getting caught up in this feud between Chairman Cheney and President Trump. It has been tough, I think, for our conference to be able to focus on the policy issues and message we want to. I don't know if there'll be a vote on this in the next weeks or not. I don't really know where the conference is on this. I just think we need to be unified on policy, on politics, and on our messaging. And right now, you know, we need to do a little work.
Yeah, we don't want anyone with the GOP symbol doing the work of Chief Commissar Pelosi. That's for sure. So anyway, that's
and the good news is no one is. But look, we are the thing that's being missed here is that we are incredibly unified on stopping this socialist agenda. We are going to take back the House in a year and 8 months and stop this nonsense.
We're going to hold you to it, Congressman. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
While mayors around the country are buckling to calls to defund the police, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is doing the exact opposite. We got that story and more in Quick Hits coming up. If you've ever thought about real estate investing, I want you to take me up on this recommendation. Visit doneforyoubuck.com where you can learn more about my friends at Done For You Real Estate. If you haven't checked them out yet, let me make this easy for you. These guys have found a way to make real estate investing straightforward, and their system flat out works. I know because I'm using it. It allows everyday, hardworking Americans to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. I can't possibly tell you in strong enough terms during this 60-second commercial how important it is you check these guys out. So how about this? If you visit doneforyoubuck.com, at the top of the page is a podcast interview I did with Done For You Real Estate, where you can hear my experience in my own words, right? I'll tell you about it in detail, from picking the city to the house, getting the broker, getting the loan, even getting a tenant set up so I get that free cash flow coming to me every month. All you have to do is go to doneforyoubuck.com, listen to that podcast interview, and give my friends at Done For You Real Estate a chance to show you what they can do for you. Governor Ron DeSantis once again showing everyone how it's done, and New York City schools canceling Columbus Day. Those stories in Quick Hits. Let's get to it. I hate to be too positive about a politician because they always let us down. They always disappoint me, all right? Even with all the great things Trump did, I still have a little list of things that I wanted to get done, you know, the wall, and there were some things that didn't happen. As much as I think the presidency overall for Trump, I give it an A minus. But there was some stuff left to do. With Governor Ron DeSantis, I'm trying to maintain some degree of skepticism because every day this guy seems to do something that I say, that's a good idea. I like that idea. That makes sense. I should move to Florida. Here he is with yet another one. Instead of defund the police, he's talking about refund the police.
I asked the legislature in this legislative session, we need to do bonuses for law enforcement. Some want to defund the police. we're funding the police and then some.
Yeah. I mean, they're just going to have to start making whole new cities in Florida. They have to clear out the Everglades and start making, tracts of land available for more housing with all the people that are going to move there, just because having somebody in charge who lives in reality, who wants to make things better for everyone in his state and understands how to do that, it's such a breath of fresh air. Instead of somebody who's just running around screaming about transgender rights, racial justice, and how the rich don't pay enough in taxes. For a lot of other people, that's not cutting it. That's not cutting it. But nonetheless, here we are. Here's the situation we're in. Ron DeSantis still showing us that good governance is possible in America today for a governor. There's some others who are doing a decent job too, but nobody has been able to hold the line against the insanity of lockdownerism and show the kind of results in a large state, a very diverse state, politically speaking. It's very close to being a 50-50 split, and a diverse state in every sense in Florida, and he's doing such a good job. And I know one day I'm going to have to come on this show and say, Governor Ron D., you've disappointed me on something, but it hasn't happened yet, so I'm still waiting for it. New York City, speaking of left-wing craziness, which I guess we do every day on the show, they're getting rid of a couple of holidays, adding some more holidays. One of them I'm totally fine with. The other one I think is, anyway, here you go. They're switching out Columbus Day for Indigenous Day and adding Juneteenth as a holiday. Adding Juneteenth, fine. No problem with that. Makes sense to me. You want to add that holiday? Great. Want to add Indigenous Day? Great. Fine. Why replace Columbus Day, which is about the exploration of the new world and the connecting of the globe that led us into the modern era? Why replace that with Indigenous Peoples Day? If you want to have an Indigenous Peoples Day celebration, go for it. Pick a day. Fine. Right? And Juneteenth, I get it. Good day to celebrate. Fine. But why cover up Columbus Day? Why? Oh, because he wasn't a good enough guy based on our standards of today? What he did was really, had a lot of impact. I mean, where was Isaac Newton on transgender rights? I don't know. Do you know? But still did some pretty important stuff that I think we can look at with some reverence to this day. I'm just putting that out there. What was Galileo's take on, what his pronouns should be? I don't know. But he did some pretty important stuff when it came to understanding our actual place in the universe. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think you do. I told you before, you had Nancy Pelosi outside. If you watched our previous segment, or one of our previous segments, Nancy Pelosi outside with a mask on, in the fresh air, even though she's vaccinated. Why? Because masking is what the smart people, it's what the smart people do. Some people even kiss through the mask. Here is Kamala Harris kissing her husband with a mask on. I mean, look, I know, this is where the libs would say, it's not a big deal. It's just, they just were, yes, but if we're going to get back to a normal world, she's vaccinated, he's vaccinated, can they just kiss like normal people? This is a real thing. There have been experts in Canada for sure, I know about this. I think there were some in Europe too. They wrote news stories about how they wanted people to mask up during relations. Lockdownerism is an anxiety disorder. And that's what you have to see. That's what you have to understand. When you put it into that context, then all this stuff makes sense. When you see that the most nerve-wracked, the most anxious, the most easily agitated by minimal risk in our society are the ones we've all been catering to here with this, oh my gosh, double mask outside, then everything makes sense. You might have heard about this because I believe we talked about it earlier in the week on the show. The D.C. Mayor Bowser has an order in place to allow wedding venues to open to a certain capacity. I forget what it is. I think up to 150 or up to 200 people, so pretty substantial. But no dancing. They're serious about that. This is our nation's capital, and at weddings they plan to, by law, ban dancing or standing close to each other. The D.C. Mayor was asked about this. Listen to what she has to say.
An alternate headline may be, now you can host a wedding in Washington, D.C., a regional meeting. You can have your friends and family for a family reunion and birthday parties at our hotels and restaurants. And just like our restaurant guidelines suggest, is that you have to be seated to enjoy the restaurant.
Can't stand in a restaurant. Can't dance at a wedding. These are our bureaucratic, CDC-enabled overlords now. Have you had enough of their arbitrary stupidity, America? Been telling you about it every day now for over a year. Have we seen enough? They're not saving us from this thing, that's for sure. They're never going to admit they were wrong, though. That's it for tonight's Hold the Line. The No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly is up next. Shields high.